And that's me. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's Tuesday afternoon here in Berlin, and it's the 19th of March 2024, and it's Space Café time again. So I can tell you how I missed it here. Today, we are here for you for our Space Café 33 minutes with, drum rolls, Kevin O'Connell. And we will talk about space crossroads, regulation, protectionism, and the quest for international cooperation. But as always, talking live in front of the screen is much more fun here. There's a bit of interaction with you. So please feel free to ask your questions and send your feedback in the chat. And as Emma said, it should work via LinkedIn, via YouTube, and here in StreamYard. Today, we are also starting something new. We have changed the platform, so please be kind with us. Emma said it already. If you just type, and you see it here in the crawler, and you just type space diplomacy in your comments in the chat on StreamYard, on LinkedIn, and YouTube, you are in a draw. And at the end of the show, you will have the chance to win a Space Watcher t-shirt. And last time we tried it at the International Women's Day session we had, and it worked pretty good. So Emma will be later on the Wheel of Fortune and turn it. And of course, you can only do that once. So, but good luck. In case you don't know us, SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based platform about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to use this occasion to thank our business club members for their support that they showed, and also for their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. And if you want to know more about our business club, how to join, just see the banner and or find it on our website. And that is a moment that here should be a crawler going through, but that's it. That's a detail. We will work on it. We learn as we go. Also, remember to sign up to our newsletters. We have now a daily one, an exclusive weekly one, and a space communication newsletter curated by Emma. And if you haven't heard about that, it's called Nobody Cares About Your Satellite. Your team or our team will post the links in for the sign up in the chat. So just click on the links to sign up for free and get involved with us. But we also passed our 102nd edition of our Space Café podcast with Markus Moslechner. Don't miss the latest one, the number 102 with Nahum Romero. We are wasting an opportunity for a profound break. How the arts and humanities can reinvigorate the vision for humanity's future in space. Long title, but a great conversation. We also have new episodes on our Space Café Radio, and the latest edition is with Dr. Daniel Erickson of Transparency International. But the best way to stay updated is to follow us on our podcast channel, and we will post our LinkedIn, our Spotify links here in the chat, so you just can click on them if that all works. And also we have new episodes on our Space Economy Insights. The episode number 4, the role of international financial institutes with Fanny Calyao de Jong, waits for you. And we will talk about it later on as well. And if you want to become a Space Watcher, visit our fan shop or on our website. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive on our webpage in the event section, and of course on YouTube. So done with all the ads, we can finally start. My guest today is someone who we are really pleased to call a friend. Like many people in the sector, we met many years ago and had the opportunity to interview him on various occasions. And he has something to say, always. It is always enlightening to listen to him. And last year in Paris, we sat together and developed the idea of a common podcast. And as mentioned earlier, we just published another episode of our Space Economy Insight podcast, where Kevin is the host together with Emma. And with that, a very warm welcome to our Space Café, Kevin O'Connell.
Thank you.
So, just a few words about our guest today. I mean, he has a long-lasting history, and it's very impressive. So, look him up at LinkedIn or on his website. It's really pretty cool. So he had very diverse careers in many sectors, commerce, intelligence, and in research. While running the center of the RAND Corporation, he spent over 3 decades working on space commercialization. And I have to say it, he is Mr. Space Economy. At least I say it one. I can't say that. It's the freedom of speech. So,
my mother thanks you.
I didn't want to go so far to say that you invented it. That would be too far, but
no.
No. Maybe we can dig Karl Marx but it's another track. As many know him, he was the director of the Office of Space Commerce within the US Department of Space Commerce. He is the true, and I mentioned it before, Mr. Space Economy. After leaving the government, he founded Space Economy Insight, an advisory firm that keeps him busier than ever before. Is that all correct so far, Kevin?
You're so good so far, Torsten.
And I know you have been yesterday at Satellite already in DC, and you're potentially later on, after we're finishing, heading back for more interviews and more excitement on the show floor.
So, absolutely.
Let's kick it off. I had the opportunity a few weeks back to attend the Munich Security Conference end of January, and 2 takeaways for me. One, US Vice President Kamala Harris mentioned space only once in the context of a domain to protect. And second, there's a rising concern about the potential collaboration between anti-democratic and totalitarian nations. Why do I bring this up, and how is it connected to our theme today? Because space, exactly like Earth, need international cooperation, because space is a critical infrastructure. We are all heavily dependent on space, but let's see how space diplomacy, our hashtag today, is proceeding on that global level. So, first question. Kevin, can you please give us an update on the current situation in terms of space regulation in the US?
Sure, Torsten, thank you. And it's great to be back with you and Emma, obviously, as well as the entire audience. It's funny, when we talk about regulation, it always gets a visceral reaction one way or the other out of people. It's actually something in my career I've really spent, part of 30 years working on it in one way or the other. And we have to remember that there are ways to write regulation in ways that actually encourage the advance of the space economy, not just limit it or stop people from doing things. And of course, that's all in addition to government investment, private investment, research, and many, many other things that governments do. Obviously, they do regulation both for being compliant with the Outer Space Treaty, but also to manage national activities and consistent with our international obligations. And so it's really important to talk about this. It's a very dynamic space right now, not just in the United States and Europe, as we'll talk in a little bit, but literally around the world. I mean, this is a very, very dynamic time for the space economy, and folks are using these tools to work with. Now, let's set a couple of bars at the outset. Number one, the best regulations are ones that are transparent, predictable, and agile. That's easier to say than it is to do, given the speed of change in the space community specifically. The best regulations are also developed in concert with industry for exactly the same reason, because the technology is moving very, very quickly. And so there's a way to approach this in a way that's actually very helpful. In the United States, there's a whole host of things going on, and I think many of our viewers may be witting about. The top level one, of course, is mission authorization, which is something that has been underway, thought through for the last 4 presidential administrations at least. And it's a recognition that while there are a handful of functions in the United States that are regulated in law, remote sensing, communications, and launch, entrepreneurs are bringing forward so many other new ideas. And the concept of mission authorization is really designed to consider the entrepreneur's interests, the goals of entrepreneurship in that case, against the needs of safety and security in different cases. I typically don't like the word balance because we sometimes misuse the word balance when we think about this. A strong economic sector is part of a national security strategy. So to say they're oppositional by balancing them is probably not the way to think about it. Mission authorization, of course, the White House has put forward a proposal and a legislative strategy on how to do this. It has been rivaled by a House in our Congress, a House proposal as well. I think the difference is the House proposal is a little bit more focused on presumption of approval and also the permitting process that would go on with regard to that. We're expecting another bill from the Senate here soon, but that's really the big one to sort of capture the breadth of things that's going on in the space economy. But it's not the only thing. Congress has just, for a brief period of time, extended the so-called learning period for the FAA in terms of regulating human spaceflight. This is another case. I told you a minute ago that regulations actually are best done when they actually have technical and scientific data, best practices, and other things that underpin them. And this is a case where there's some belief that we may not have enough experience to effectively regulate in this area. The FCC has also just put out the direct-to-handset regulations and has offered to do some rulemaking on in-space manufacturing, et cetera. There's a very interesting, this is not related to space, there's a very interesting Supreme Court case that'll be heard later this year, which will assess the extent to which federal agencies have the right to actually regulate in areas that are beyond their strict legal authorities. And I think people will think about the FCC in that regard, given their communications writ, from the communications, the authorization that they have. But they're obviously doing things in other areas. They just celebrated their 20th anniversary being the space debris area as well. So things are going on there. Obviously, in a world where defense in space has taken on more prominence, we're about to see DoD's commercial integration strategy. And then there are a whole bunch of discussions underway about how to protect, indemnify, leverage insurance for commercial capabilities that are actually involved in crisis or conflict, for obvious reasons for our listeners to think about that. And we wrote about that back in 1999. And it's actually something that really needs direct treatment today. So there's a heck of a lot going on in the United States as there is elsewhere.
I like when you reference to books from the past, like, oh, we wrote about it. I mean, so much is written, and we simply ignored it for decades. But from an U.S. perspective, and you're an American citizen, you work for the government. How do you perceive the regulatory initiatives that are going on here in Europe? And I mean, we don't have a few of these regulations in place, but I mean, and you observe their development as much as we do it. So how do you perceive them?
So I think there are actually two big shifts that are underway in Europe that we need to pay attention to. And I suspect both of them will have something to do ultimately with regulation. I think for the first time, what we're hearing is that traditional industrial policy in Europe, the idea of giving a certain amount of money to ESA and other space activities, and in return getting a parallel return, if you will, back to the national government. I think that's finally being questioned as something that's highly inefficient. I'm sure it's not a uniform view, but we've heard key spokespeople in Europe talk about this as a frustration, worried about inefficiency, worried about competitiveness of European industry, things like that.
You talk about the geo return.
Exactly, geo return, exactly. So we're hearing people speak about that for the first time in a very long time. That's one trend. The other trend we're hearing is what we'll say, and we expect to see something about this in the European law, space law, will be about consolidating the European market. Again, some of that will be quite good, but I'm worried that we're also hearing some of the first hints about protectionism. Building up some walls. Not that we don't have our own walls here in the United States, but that's something we're hearing about more and more. It also sounds like that there's not a uniform view in Europe that that's a good set of ideas, if it in fact comes out in the space law. I want to be crystal clear on that. But so we want to be very careful to watch that. And so, beyond Europe, we're also seeing important discussions. I think, I was trying to be in Munich this week. There's an important conversation about policy and regulatory frameworks for what are affectionately called the alt-PNT community, in a world where there are continuing attacks on GPS, Galileo signals that affect, for example, aircraft. And so do we need new policy and regulation for these missions that are coming forward in the market very, very quickly. It's very canonical, but the idea that technology races out in front of policy, we see this across the space community. And so the real challenge is, how do decision makers actually keep up so that policy is even close to the developments we're seeing in technology? On the other hand, we see a number of countries around the world, emerging space countries, that really want to develop an effective policy and regulatory regime as they get started in the space economy. So in Europe specifically, I think those two trends are ones to watch with regard to how they might play out in regulation.
And you say that from the glass house called ITAR, right?
So, it's funny you say that, because I was at Satellite yesterday just for the first day, and that's the light day for those who have attended Satellite before. And I'd say that the common thread that we heard from about 20 different people were concerns about access to the U.S. market. And so that is definitely a topic. We do know from last Space Council meeting that the Space Council staff was given an export control reform task. That's very, very important. And again, export controls, I should say, that exist in a world where other people already have similar technology or the same technology are really ineffective. And so what we have to think about in that regard is, what are we really protecting? Sometimes in regulation, when I say that I think regulation needs to be based on facts and data and things like that, sometimes in regulation, what creeps in is what I'll call wishful thinking, and that's never helpful. And so with export controls, I think it's time for us to take a really hard look, not only in the United States, but again, if we see it coming forward in Europe, to make sure that we are able to share with allies as much as possible. There's no doubt nations will always continue to protect their interests, but as much as possible, people are able to share as we're heading into an even more complicated world than we're in today.
But what you call it right now, protectionism already as behavior, or what is a word for that? How we can?
So I think we're worried we could head into a protectionist era where countries understandably countries or regions, obviously we're talking about Europe, want to protect nascent industries and essentially build barriers around that. That is not a new technique in economic history by any way, shape, or form. And the problem that will create is it will create a limitation on our ability to cooperate, which is the other part of our conversation we're going to have. And so we have to be very, very careful in putting up roadblocks, what the intended and unintended effects are. We see the effects of ITAR in other areas, like the AUKUS decision. Is a place where three heads of state want to do something, and ITAR is actually creating complications in a place where everybody wants to do the same thing. And so export control reform, very important priority for the administration. We had it as well. It's hard to do. It's hard to get the bureaucracy to move, and the bureaucracy has to be objective about what is controllable and what is essentially, as we used to say in the imagery business, where the horses are out of the barn.
Last week I had the great pleasure to attend the DGI, the Geospatial Intelligence event for defense and security in London. And that was very themed. And one of the main topics that came back again and again, and especially in this light of protectionism we are talking here about, was trust. Trust in partners, trust in data, trust in the allies. Yeah. So and how does this regulation or regulatory initiative fit into this trust conversation? I mean, you touched a bit on that, but how can we jump over us? I mean, we have the Five Eyes, we have the Five Eyes plus two. You mentioned AUKUS, Australia as one of your closest allies, and even there, you have these hurdles.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of ways to think about the trust relationships, and especially when you're in the military domain. But again, I think this applies across the board in the space domain. No commercial vendor wants data that lacks integrity and security any more than a military organization wants it. And so when we think about trust at the technical level, people have to be certain that data is certifiable, has integrity, has security, et cetera, or frankly, it's useless or worse than that. It's not even worth, having that kind of cooperation. So on the technical level, I think people are working hard on that. We look at areas like cybersecurity. We look at orbital debris mitigation and some of the techniques that can be used. Data sharing can be used to do that. By the way, I will add as an aside, we are finally seeing we're finally seeing investors paying even more attention to those minute details, cybersecurity strategies, orbital debris mitigation strategies. Investors have always been interested in regulatory matters, but they're paying more and more attention to these smaller details, not less important, but smaller details that they typically might not have looked at even as recently as 3 years ago. That's at the technical level. I think at the broader political level, we're seeing lots of opportunities for collaboration, specifically in space. Obviously, the Artemis Accord here we hold up as kind of a banner, 36 signatories now. And that's not just to do work together to return permanently and sustainably to the moon, but in some ways we carry our values together as we go back to the moon permanently. Now, that doesn't mean we agree on everything and every single thing, but it means we have a set of principles and values that we're going to take back to the moon with us. I could also shift over to NATO. We've just welcomed some new members to NATO. NATO has a space strategy now, and again, is as important as ever, is working to identify threats in space to both national assets, but also NATO collective assets as well. So we're seeing lots of places for cooperation that is moving forward. And we know that people have historically pursued their own interest in space, but we're seeing a growing interest in collaboration. The last Space Council meeting at the end of 2023 was really focused on international collaboration in space. And I'll just add one more dimension, Torsten, which is increasingly industry is being brought into these conversations in what are affectionately known as the Track 1.5 conversations. And so I believe even today we have a conversation, United States and France, on involving US and French industry to collaborate. I think that's a very good thing. I do think there's a challenge, though, behind that, which is that even as we have these discussions in these important forums and speeches and parties and things like that, the real question becomes, what do you do next? Because the policies that impeded collaboration yesterday typically will impede collaboration tomorrow. And so, especially at the industry level, what we're hearing people say is, okay, we're delighted to have come together and talk about opportunities to work together. What do we actually have to do to make that happen? And as you know, industry typically has a shorter timeline on which they want that to happen than governments might.
I mean, I followed the conversations last week in London, and there was NATO was present, and especially the geospatial intelligence community was present without any doubt, and that's a high sensitivity of data we are talking about. So but again, many commercial partners are on the table as well. But the question is, what data can be shared? How do we ease the unclassification of data to make it available to a broader community, or where the data are coming from, as you mentioned? So, I mean, I have a very strong sensation that when it comes to the international cooperation, there's still a lot of barriers between nations, mainly, and that's my interpretation, due to national internal goals and local politics rather than the true global goals. And I mean, we are asking this question about ethics and moral quite often, also on panels. And what do you think? Where are we heading? There are a lot of talks about the importance of space corporations, but you mentioned Artemis, but when does it turn into something concrete, or are these just political statements?
No, I actually don't think they're political statements. I think we're actually on a trajectory. It might be too slow a trajectory, from your perspective, but I think we're on a trajectory to share more and more data. I don't think there's any one policy that impedes the sharing of data. Sometimes it's simply about past practice, a cultural resistance to sharing elsewhere. Sometimes it's about legitimate technical, how do I share data amongst different entities where data standards and formats are very, very different. The modern IT world is actually able to help quite a bit with that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is related to legitimate sensitivities. If I share a piece of sensitive information with you, am I confident, and do you have the capability? Both are important to actually protect that data in a similar manner to the way I would have it protected. And those, as we go across borders and across partners, those just vary. So I don't think it's any one thing that blocks it all. I think we're on a trajectory now to share more and more data of a sensitive nature. Again, we're living in a complex world. And so many of those things now have to be looked at very critically to make sure that what we choose not to share, we have very good reason not to share it, because the ultimate goal of helping an ally or helping a partner, may be more important than that.
Before we come to our last round, call to our audience. If you have questions on that matter, and I'm quite sure you will have, please put them here in the chat that we can see them, and then put them on screen. The second point, if you would like to be in the draw for one of our exclusive Space Watcher t-shirts, put #space diplomacy in your text to us, and it even just can have this simple statement in, and you send some greetings with that if it doesn't turn into a question. So, Kevin, we talked about where we are, what might be a future, but what do we need to come back to a trusted cooperation? And that it's not just space. We had a conversation before about it's not a secret, I think, to talk about the German-French relationship. I mean, we had the Weimar Triangle here together with Poland the last days in Berlin, but coming back to a trusted cooperation in space, in access to space, and in access to data. So what is needed?
So I think we're already on a good trajectory in this area. I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to work together. And again, there are multiple examples. They start by necessity on the national security side. We can see war games, we can see exercises, places where we literally sit down together and work together. On the commercial side, there may be natural relations that have emerged between companies over the years. The question is whether policy impediments actually block those things from advancing further. And so I think the very first thing is thinking about this in a way that says we need to help people work together. That's the first thing. The second is to carefully think, to go back to where we started, Torsten. When we think about regulation, we need to take a hard-hitting look at what regulation is actually either out of date, actually creates a problem we didn't intend to create by having it. And again, this is where the typical speed of regulation is typically slow enough and bureaucratic enough, and requires enough time to go through it, that the technology or the actual issue has moved well out. And so we have to be very careful to assess regulation so that it creates opportunities for collaboration, not impedes them, intentionally or otherwise. Again, I think sometimes there are unintended consequences. So in the export control arena, for example, I mentioned that, I must have heard a dozen people or 20 people complain about this yesterday downtown. I think in the export control arena, people are starting to think about, and I think this is very early stages, multilateral export control regimes. Are there ways we can think about this within a community of countries that are actually willing to open up. Again, it won't be for everything ever. That would be a naive viewpoint, but can open up under a multilateral framework. We have this in other areas in security. Can we do it in this place? So we're actually doing more cooperation, building trust over time, and being very effective with our partners in moving forward.
And we shouldn't forget that we talk here as well about solving problems, challenges for the entire humanity, not a particular one. When we talk about space debris, when we talk about space traffic management, when we talk about climate change, that is not something where Europe can sit back and say, we are fine with that, yeah, nor you can. Yeah.
No, let me mention just one other thing very quickly. What we are seeing at the global level, we're seeing more conversations. I mean, the listeners will be well aware of the fact that we've just come out of WRC 23, where the space community was again negotiating with mostly the terrestrial community for access to precious spectrum, for scientific information, to bring data down to Earth so people can communicate that don't have that capability, et cetera. We're also seeing an increase in discussions about lunar governance, which is actually very positive. We've been associated with the Lunar Policy Priorities Initiative, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative designed to encourage prosperous activity on the moon. We saw that there's at least an idea floated at STSC by Romania at the UN for an action group on lunar governance, which has considerable interest. It's not finished yet, but so people are starting to think ahead of the problem so that cooperation becomes easier. About different industry initiatives like confers, which I often talk about, where industry is thinking about best practices in advance of the market emerging, or ideas for governance in those areas. So I remain an optimist. You know me well enough to know I remain an optimist in this area. Are there challenges? Sure, there are, but that's our quest, is to solve those.
I'm also an optimist. I'm sometimes just hide it a bit, so that. But I mean, the lunar governance, I mean, that's very close to my heart, being also part of the HUG working group on space resources. And we have also our friend and colleague and host of the Space Law Breakfast, Professor Stephen Freeland,
right,
together with Andre Mistal, running I think it's a working group at UN Copius on space resources. So in the meantime, we have a number of questions.
Okay.
So Regie, will you fire them in, or do we take them as we want?
I actually can't see them from my screen, so maybe someone could.
Yeah, Chris asked a question. So space diplomacy is also about integrating commercial entities in the mix. When commercial is the de factos involved in dual tech, a party to a conflict, even a potential target. Where do we draw the line between international security and the private sector interest? Wonderful. What do I do?
Great question.
Can my private satellite be attacked?
So that's an even different. I think in those three categories, dual tech, party to a conflict, or even a target. I mean, we could give you different dimensions of those three. I go back to the point I made earlier in the conversation about the term balance, because I often hear we're balancing national security with economic prosperity and things like that. That's not the right word. What we really need to do is to recognize that these are dual use capabilities in many cases. Mm-hmm. The regulatory regime, to stick with our theme of the day, the regulatory regime can actually help distinguish between those two things. I don't need to tell the listeners here that when we think about RPO in space, there's a history in the security world of what RPO related to. It was not a positive thing typically. Okay, but now we know that one of the next waves in space commerce is going to be things moving up next to things in space and actually inspecting, refueling. Again, you all know that. So there is a way via a well-crafted regulatory regime, and I think we did some of this in the NOAA regs back in 2020, to basically say, okay, if you're going to do that and you're truly a commercial operator, then you need to let people know 5 days in advance that it's going to happen. And on a commercial basis, very few people would care about that. If it's something different, then it's different, and it's not the same thing. I think when you're a party to a conflict or even a target, that is a subject for a very important conversation that is underway right now. What are the expectations both of the government and industry? What's the role of insurance? What's the role of indemnification? That's a much larger problem that I think needs treatment, not just here in the United States, but literally in all of the governments around the world that have major space programs.
As Emma is listening very carefully, that's a great topic as well for her Black Ops series. I'm very, very sure about that. So next question, Valentin, Servus, Vienna. Kevin, what do you expect from the EU regulations? So maybe in correlation with the US regulations.
So my good friend Valentin always asks a good question. I'm not totally sure at this point, other than the things that I mentioned before. I think there's an attempt to rethink how things are done in Europe, so that there is fairness and equity to the countries that all participate in funding the space program. But there's also a recognition that there's an inefficiency that sometimes comes from that needs to be paid attention to. Again, a competitiveness aspect. And then, as we've said before, we hear different views across Europe about the extent to which Europe needs to protect a nascent industry in a specific area and build up walls, as opposed to allowing for cooperation. Again, I don't think this is unique to US and Europe. We hear about it in other countries as well. That we need to protect, create some sort of protectionist walls around a nascent industry to grow it up. That's probably a more dangerous world, given all the things we've talked about with regard to cooperation. So we'll anxiously await the EU space regulation when it comes out. But those are at least a couple of things I think will be in there. There'll certainly be some things in there on our favorite topic of sustainability.
Great. So next one, Hazel McGregor. Could you speak a bit more about the lunar policy initiatives, if you can?
Yeah, so the lunar policy priorities are a set of, again, have been underway for a little over a year now, and a discussion amongst many different groups about the most important topics to think about as we head back to the moon permanently and sustainably. Again, I think the most important thing here is we're doing this as we get ready to go back, not wait till we get there and then basically say, gee, what do we do now? I think there are a lot of views about how we should think about international governance, how national efforts will actually probably drive activities, and so that in concert with the discussions we're seeing at the UN are a positive development, given that people are thinking ahead of the problem.
Okay, we just take two more questions, and then we are over 33 minutes, of course, but it's not unexpected, but you have a hard stop later on. So, do we get another question? Emma's, maybe. So, yes, Emma's questions. You can ask it directly, Emma. It's your question. So, but however, I will do that. So, Kevin, we often speak about collaboration, but do you think that such level of trust is at the moment achievable between US and China?
No.
Interesting finger pointing.
Yeah, the simple answer here is no. The way I think about China here is that there are probably a small number of issues, and it goes back to what we said, Torsten, on how do we do more? How do we develop trust? Because in this particular case, we'll need to develop a lot of trust. It does not mean there may not be very specific small issues around which we would agree to collaborate. Whether it be astronaut safety, whether it be exchange of lunar materials or lunar samples and things like that. Very narrowly crafted issues that begin to expand confidence between countries. The Chinese often like to say that the Wolf Amendment precludes all aspects of cooperation between the United States and China on space. That's actually incorrect. It does allow, with authorization, for select things to be done. So the door is not completely closed. It is open. It's open with a bureaucratic process in place that gets approval and serious consideration of what the relationships will be, but it's not a closed door. And I think the way we move that ball forward is to essentially do things in small areas, build confidence, and go from there. There's some issues around which we know both players are going to have to play critical roles, the United States and China, for sure. A global space safety system that doesn't involve China is probably not going to be an effective system. So how do we actually open those bridges?
Okay, so last question, and yeah, it's on the China topic as well. Van Friscal, I'm curious about how can small countries like maybe Taiwan develop their space capabilities? What space policy are suggested for these kind of countries, and what kind of advantage do they bring?
I think this person was listening on the call that I had right before we came on this particular call. Because I have to say, in my travels, the question I always get is, how do we create a space industry? And we saw yesterday a satellite route with two gentlemen from Monaco. I always remind people of the country of Luxembourg. And Luxembourg likes to say we occupy more space in space than we do on Earth. It's interesting to look at the history of how Luxembourg got into space. It was very controversial at the time. But obviously for them it's paid off. Two of the largest communications companies in the world are in Luxembourg, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's a whole host of things. I often say, because again, in my travels, I get a lot of questions about this. My first answer is it's not enough to just be excited about space. We hear a lot of real space enthusiasts and senior level people in lots of countries that say, "Hey, I'm excited. I want to get into this." It's a combination of factors that you have to bring to bear on this. The first is entrepreneurship and talent. Does a country have a culture of innovation? Does it have a culture of entrepreneurship? Those are not the same thing. What's the talent base look like? Regulations. Maybe you don't have. A number of countries, as I mentioned before, are trying to write laws and regulations and policies that actually help encourage an industry to develop, et cetera. To the person's question, I've spent some time in Taiwan talking to them specifically about this. And so there's a handful of things, I don't dare to call them a set of ingredients, but talent, regulation, effective regulation, sustainability, attention to sustainability for countries that are just getting into this area, the role of finance, government and private finance in helping fuel the space economy for that particular country. And then lastly, again, I haven't done these in any specific order, but, the ability to look at your international partners. Listeners of Space Economy Insights will remember our conversation with Dr. Joao, in which he talked about the importance of partnerships, but he made a very important point, which is that emerging countries like Angola actually need to be smart partners when they engage other potential partners. And so you have to have if you will, an equal partnership in terms of how you understand the problems and what you're trying to do. So those are just, and apologize for the quickness of that, those are some of the things that I think countries of any size can do, or any level of maturity.
Great. Thank you so much. And I know, we can do that for another few hours, but you have engagements later on. And I'm super pleased to see so many people here joining us in the studio or here and on our new platform. Really, thank you very much. But we promised you a draw. So over to Emma. Can you turn now the Wheel of Fortune?
I will, which I believe is something that the production does, and I pretend. Here we go.
Somebody has to just press the button.
Yeah, wow. Exactly. Yeah. But we had somebody entering, so.
Do we see? Oh no, we have just two people that participated.
Well, okay. It's still a raffle if you have two people.
Yeah. Frank, hit the button. Oh, come on.
I mean, even me, because I wrote it. It's true, because if I'm gonna come out, I will give it to someone else. No.
Okay, no.
Matilde. Okay, much better, Matilde.
Matilde, please reach out to us. That we have. I think we have your email address. If you're here in the room, we reach out to get your the size of your T-shirt and your address, and then we will send it wherever you are.
We are lucky that Emma did not win, by the way. I'll just say that for the record.
And Emma has Space Watcher T-shirts already. So.
I'm sure.
Okay. what's next? I have to say something important. I just want to say thank you very much, everyone who listened so far. So, but before we end, Emma, back to you. Tell us what's coming up, what's on our agenda.
Thank you very much, Torsten. Let me just switch between the 2000s tabs that I have.
It's pretty challenging, isn't it?
It is a bit challenging, I have to say, between multiple channels. Okay, before we say goodbye, of course, let me remind you of our upcoming events. So we have in the 26th of March, 26th, not the 26th. 26th of March at 4 p.m. European time, we're having a roundtable about the Artemis Accords seen from a Global South perspective. So I will lead the Artemis Roundtable. We will have Mike Gold from the US. We will have Rodrigo Leonardi from Brazil, and we're still waiting for other two very interesting guests. So if you are into Artemis Accords and geopolitics and Global South, don't miss it, because I'm expecting a bit of a discussion, or I hope at least to stimulate a bit of the discussion. Same day, 26th and 27th of March, we're going to have Space Talks 4.0 in Oxfordshire. We are present. We're going to be in Oxfordshire. We're media partners, so don't miss it as an appointment. 8 to 12 of April, the 39th Space Symposium in Colorado Springs. We're going to be there, Torsten and I. So if you're going to be there, please say hi. 24th of April, we have a BDI breakfast in Bremen. Torsten will be there in person. And on the first... and then we're going to... At the same day, there is thank you very much, Torsten, first of European Space Plane Summit, again in Bremen, and Torsten will be there too, because it's going to be in the same place. Don't forget, of course, to subscribe to all our events, to check us out on our website, on social media, send us our feedbacks. Thank you for the patience today. I'm sorry we had a bit of a dislocation with YouTube, but no worries. We were there. We saw you. Thank you for participating. Check us out on X, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. This is for the evergreen of you that still use Facebook. And of course, for Torsten mainly. And don't forget to sign up for our daily, weekly newsletters, because they're packed with information. We craft them properly. So if you want to be updated with everything that we think and with all the fantastic things that Kevin said today, the best way to be adjourned is either contact Kevin directly or follow SpaceWatch.Global, our weekly newsletter. Sign up for them. We also have a communication newsletter for those of you interested in how space and tech should craft a message better. It's called Nobody Cares About Your Satellite. It's my personal contribution to the debate. So sign up for that newsletter too, if you are in the mood for some wit, for some tongue-in-cheek humor. And of course, if you want to support us, we are independent, we are unique, we are one of the few European media bodies that is independently following the space geopolitical scene. So treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today, and either check us out on our fan page on our website or subscribe for our business club if you are a company or coming from an agency. Thank you very much for your interest today. Thank you, of course, Torsten, for being our host. And thanks again, Kevin. It's always a pleasure to be here with you and to hear your thoughts. It's also a pleasure to hear a native English speaker, something that Torsten and we cannot say.
Come on. By the way, I just have to say it out of pure jealousness. I mean, since you appeared on screen here, so we had 20% more audience.
It's the combo Emma Gatti and Kevin O'Connell, this Italian-Irish accent.
Okay, I'm off. That's why your podcast is so successful. I
Yes, exactly. It's the Italian-Irish humor that we infuse in. No, thank you very much, Kevin. It's always a pleasure, because it's always it's one of the most incredible things of SpaceWatch Global. We try to bring the experts to you and we let them distill the knowledge for you guys. So thank you for our audience. We were many on YouTube, on X, on LinkedIn, on StreamYard. Thank you for joining us. Of course, thank you for our tech team, Frank and Claudia, in the creating the production and making this happen and making this live. Chris also supporting us from the stage for all the smooth operation. Thank you very much. And of course, we hope you to see you in the next event. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media in case I didn't say that before. And don't forget, become a space watcher. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.